October 3rd, 2025. The story began not with a scandal, but with a cancellation. At exactly 10:17 a.m., staff at Royal Lodge, Windsor, received a short internal message. All arrangements are to be paused until further notice. Within hours, florists, caterers, and photographers were quietly dismissed. The celebration, Sarah Ferguson's 66th birthday party, was over before it began. No press statement, no apology, just silence. According to multiple insiders, the decision came from within the family itself. It wasn't the palace, said one source familiar with the planning. It was the daughters. They told their mother they couldn't come. For weeks, the Duchess of York had planned what friends described as a hopeful reunion. A guest list of 30 champagne from Windsor stock, even a private jazz band. But two names on that list were more important than all the others: Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. And they weren't coming. They adore their mother, said a former aide. But the timing was impossible. With their father back in the headlines, they felt one photograph could undo everything. The headlines had indeed returned, louder than before. Just days earlier, new documents resurfaced linking Prince Andrew to his 2011 correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein. Tabloids had reignited the old scandal. TV networks replayed the infamous interview. Royal commentators called it a ghost that refuses to die. By the morning of the planned celebration, tension inside Royal Lodge was thick. Sarah was told the optics were too dangerous, another insider explained. Having the girls there smiling, laughing while Andrew's name trended again, it would have looked tone-deaf. So she canceled. What should have been a private family party turned into a symbolic retreat. The first public sign that the House of York was breaking apart, not through confrontation, but through quiet omission. Neighbors reported seeing only a single car leaving Royal Lodge that afternoon. No decorations, no music, no sign of festivity. The gate stayed closed, said one local resident. It was strange, like the house was holding its breath. The cancellation spread fast across British media. The Daily Chronicle called it a birthday that never was. The Telegraph noted that the Duchess's silence spoke louder than any statement. Social networks lit up with speculation. Were Beatrice and Eugenie finally stepping away? At Buckingham Palace, officials declined to comment. But a royal communications officer, speaking off the record, hinted that the timing aligned with broader discussions about optics. When pressed, he added, "Sometimes absence is the most respectful presence." You won. For Sarah Ferguson, it was a personal heartbreak wrapped in political necessity. For her daughters, it was a calculated silence. The start of a separation neither wanted, yet both seemed to accept. By that evening, the story had overtaken the royal news cycle. What began as a birthday plan had become a symbol of something deeper, a fracture in the family once known for loyalty, humor, and defiance. As dusk fell over Windsor, Royal Lodge stood dark and still. Inside its walls, a mother faced the reality of her daughter's distance. And across London, two princesses, once inseparable, always devoted, had quietly taken their first step away from the shadow of their name. Because in 2025, inside the modern monarchy, silence isn't just a reaction, it's a message. And on that October night, the York sisters had just delivered theirs. By October 4th, the cancellation had become a national talking point. The British press called it the quietest scandal in Windsor. But the silence that followed was anything but quiet. Behind palace walls, decisions were being made, strategic, defensive, irreversible. And at the center of it all stood two daughters of York, suddenly unreachable. That same morning, royal correspondents noticed a new entry missing from the court circular. Prince Andrew's title, the Duke of York, had quietly disappeared from internal documents. Within hours, palace aides confirmed that Andrew would no longer use or request the style in any official capacity. It was more than a formality. It was the final unthreading of his royal identity. According to one aide, the move had been discussed for months but accelerated after the October 3rd birthday cancellation. It was meant to show accountability, the aide said. But to the family, it felt like a punishment disguised as reform. And by October 5th, the ripple effects reached every corner of Royal Lodge. Ferguson reportedly canceled a planned podcast recording and was advised by her PR team to step back from media appearances indefinitely. But while the parents scrambled for damage control, their daughters were already gone. Early that morning, paparazzi stationed outside Windsor noticed something strange. The usually busy driveway of Royal Lodge remained empty. No guards, no household staff. Beatrice's car had been moved days earlier. Eugenie's hadn't been seen since September. It was as if the sisters had evaporated. They disappeared before the headlines even hit full force, said one longtime royal correspondent. That's not panic, it's planning. By October 6th, the first sighting came in. Beatrice, photographed in London's financial district, entering her office through a side entrance, no driver, no assistant, no security detail. Her expression was unreadable, her posture rigid. A source close to her described her demeanor as composed but detached. She's gone into work mode, the source told the Crown Desk. No royal business, no social events, no commentary, just spreadsheets and silence. Eugenie's move was more visible, if only briefly. Late that same evening, a blurry image surfaced online showing her boarding a commercial flight at Heathrow, husband and child in tow. The photo, snapped by another passenger, captured only a flash of her profile, face turned away. By morning, tabloids ran the headline. Eugenie flees to Portugal as Yorks face fallout. The framing was sensational, but the story behind it was simple. Eugenie wasn't fleeing. She was choosing distance. A friend later clarified, she wasn't escaping scandal. She was protecting her sanity. Portugal is quiet. No cameras, no royal pressure, no ghosts of Windsor. Hola. Meanwhile, inside the palace's communications office, staff were ordered to minimize commentary on the York family. The official position, silence. The unofficial one, containment. It's like the Yorks have become toxic assets, said a palace employee off the record. The safest move is to freeze them out completely. Still, the vacuum of information only made the public hungrier. On social media, royal watchers dissected every movement, every rumor. Where is Beatrice? Has Eugenie renounced her HRH? Did they cut off contact with their parents? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be avoided. By October 7th, the tabloids found their next target, Sarah Ferguson's finances. An investigative column in the Mirror suggested her recent podcast venture had been partly supported by undisclosed private sponsors. The implication was vague but damning. Ferguson's representatives denied wrongdoing, calling it a malicious misinterpretation. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Andrew's disgrace was already back in circulation. Ferguson's credibility was faltering. And Beatrice and Eugenie, two women who had spent their lives quietly shielding their parents, were caught in the crossfire. They know how this works, explained royal analyst Lydia Harrington on BBC Morning Briefing. The sins of the father don't stay with the father in this family. They stain everyone who shares the name. The York sisters have realized that the only way to survive is to disappear. Disappear. They did. Friends described a sudden halt in communication, calls unanswered, group chats left on read. Even family friends said they hadn't heard from either sister in days. It's not anger, one of them said. It's exhaustion. They've been living in crisis management mode since their 20s. In London, Beatrice was seen late one night leaving a meeting at a consulting firm. In Lisbon, Eugenie was photographed having coffee alone near the Tagus River, wearing sunglasses and a navy blazer. Two images, half a continent apart, but telling the same story, distance, both physical and emotional. Inside Royal Lodge, the absence was palpable. Staff were instructed to keep the estate quiet. Security reduced to a skeleton crew. Neighbors described the house as hollow, still unlived in. One local resident said, "You used to hear laughter when the girls visited. Now it's just whine through the trees." By the evening of October 7th, commentators had coined a new phrase for the unfolding situation: the vanishing of the Yorks. It wasn't a scandal in the traditional sense. No speeches, no leaks, no interviews. Just silence, spreading outward like a shadow across Windsor. That silence, royal insiders now admit, wasn't accidental. It was coordinated. "There's a clear strategy," said a senior communications consultant. "Let the noise burn itself out. The public gets bored of empty spaces. The trick is to stay invisible long enough for the story to move on." But the story didn't move on. It deepened. Every appearance missed, every invitation declined, became another headline. And as the York sisters continued their vanishing act, one truth began to take shape. One the palace could neither confirm nor deny. This wasn't retreat. It was survival. And as the first week of October closed, the silence of Beatrice and Eugenie had grown louder than any royal statement could ever be. Because in the House of Windsor, where image is everything, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear. By October 8th, the York story had reached a new phase, one the palace preferred to call stabilization, but insiders quietly referred to as containment. After days of speculation, media hysteria, and a growing digital obsession with the whereabouts of the sisters, the family's next move was deliberate. Nothing No press conferences, no photographs, no royal diary entries. The Yorks had entered a blackout. Behind that silence, however, the machinery of crisis management was whirring. Sources close to Clarence House confirmed that advisors were coordinating with the Duchess of York's PR team, urging one unified strategy: step back, say nothing, wait it out. For Sarah Ferguson, that advice came too late. She had already given a recorded interview weeks earlier, set to air on a lifestyle channel. The production team hesitated. Should they pull it? It was all smiles, all optimism, said a producer. Then suddenly, the context changed. It felt tone-deaf overnight. By October 8th, the broadcast was officially postponed. The York matriarch's visibility was becoming a liability. But what captured the public's attention was the absence of her daughters, two women whose composure once humanized the family name. Now, they were ghosts in the headlines. Beatrice, still in London, was seen only twice that week, both times entering and leaving her Mayfair office before sunrise. Even colleagues said she barely spoke. She looks tired, one coworker said. It's like she's carrying something that doesn't belong to her. Eugenie, still in Lisbon, had effectively gone off the grid. Her usual charity network received no updates. Calls went unanswered. The Royal Foundation, where she occasionally collaborated, reported she was on personal leave. An insider close to the sisters told the Daily Chronicle, "They're not hiding from the press. They're hiding from the noise. They know the media will move on eventually. They just have to outlast it." But the palace's silence had its own consequences. Without official guidance, the narrative filled itself. Tabloids began drawing parallels between the Yorks and the Sussexes, painting Beatrice and Eugenie as the new royals in exile, a label neither sister wanted but could no longer escape. The Times described their absence as a quiet protest, not of defiance, but of exhaustion. "People misunderstand royal silence," said commentator Lydia Harrington on Good Morning Britain. "It's not passivity, it's a language. When Beatrice and Eugenie refuse to appear, it's not because they have nothing to say. It's because every word can be weaponized." By October 9th, the strategy appeared to be working. The frenzy began to slow. Other royal stories, King Charles's environmental campaign, Catherine's health initiatives, took over the front pages. But within Windsor circles, the calm was deceptive. Inside Royal Lodge, staff described an atmosphere heavy with absence. The Duchess, isolated and anxious, had reportedly stopped using the main rooms of the estate. One staff member said she spent hours walking the grounds alone. "She talks to the dogs," they added. "And sometimes she talks to herself." Prince Andrew, meanwhile, had grown increasingly agitated. Friends say he spent that week calling old contacts, lawyers, advisors, even former aides, trying to gauge whether his title removal could be reversed. "He thinks it's a temporary measure," said one associate. "He doesn't see that the family has moved on." And the daughters? They remained silent, watching from afar. But even silence, when too long, starts to sound like confession. Late on October 9th, a new controversy began brewing online. "Where are the Yorks?" trended across social media after a royal watcher compiled a thread showing every recent event the sisters had missed. Within hours, thousands joined the speculation. Some sympathetic, others cruel. Beatrice is ashamed. Eugenie's in hiding. The Yorks are finished. The palace, predictably, declined comment. But a communications staffer privately admitted the obvious. "This isn't working anymore. Silence only works when people stop listening." That same evening, a source close to Beatrice said she received a call from her mother, an emotional plea for contact. Sarah was crying, the source revealed. She said, "They're turning you against me." Beatrice didn't respond. She just said, "Mom, I can't fix this right now." By October 10th, the story had shifted from curiosity to narrative. The York sisters versus their legacy. Newspapers began publishing side-by-side timelines comparing their professional lives to their parents' scandals, a visual reminder of how far the daughters had gone to separate themselves. One editorial headline captured the public mood perfectly: "The sins of the father, the silence of the daughters." Royal insiders say this headline rattled Buckingham Palace. It reframed the sisters not as victims of scandal, but as players in a generational reckoning, symbols of a modern monarchy trying to distance itself from its own past. That day, Beatrice's husband, Edoardo Mapelli Mazzi, was seen leaving their London apartment alone. No comment, no smile. The tabloids speculated about marital tension, but sources close to the couple dismissed it. "They're fine," one said. "They're just under siege." Eugenie, for her part, broke her silence in the smallest way possible, liking an Instagram post from her charity, Project Zero, featuring a quote, "In the stillness, we remember who we are." It was a subtle signal, But in royal culture, subtlety can roar. By that weekend, a sense of finality had settled over the York narrative. The family had retreated into silence so deep it felt rehearsed. Reporters stationed at Windsor began packing up. "It's over," one BBC correspondent said. "There's nothing left to photograph." But even as the headlines faded, the public sensed something unresolved. The silence had become too deliberate, too synchronized. And inside Royal Lodge, behind those shuttered windows and unlit rooms, something was shifting again. One insider, asked whether the sisters would eventually break their silence, gave a chilling reply. They don't need to speak. The palace already knows what they're saying. Because in Windsor, every silence has an echo. And this one was growing louder by the day. By October 11th, the quiet had cracked. The York silence, once interpreted as composure, was now beginning to sound like fracture. Inside Royal Lodge, tension hung as heavily as the autumn fog rolling across Windsor. Staff who'd stayed behind described doors closing, voices raised, phones ringing off the hook. According to two palace insiders, Prince Andrew had reached his breaking point. He felt abandoned, one said. He couldn't understand why his daughters weren't coming home. In his mind, family loyalty was unshakable. But in the new Windsor reality, loyalty had limits. That morning, Andrew reportedly called both Beatrice and Eugenie from the landline at Royal Lodge. Neither answered. He left messages, the insider added. They were emotional, pleading, even angry. He said things like, "You're my blood. You can't just vanish." Hours later, one message came back. Not a call, but a text. From Beatrice, it read only, "We need time, Papa. Please understand." Those 5 words confirmed what the palace already suspected. The Yorks were no longer united. Outside the gates, the public narrative was shifting too. The press began referring to Andrew as the exiled Duke, a man living in the shadow of privilege he could no longer defend. Meanwhile, journalists described Sarah Ferguson as the last loyal York, the only one still standing publicly by his side. But that loyalty was taking its toll. On October 12th, Fergie appeared online for the first time in weeks. The post, a simple image of her walking her dogs near the lodge, carried a caption that read, "Even in quiet times, love endures." Within an hour, the post had gone viral. Within 2, it was deleted. "It was meant as comfort," said a friend of the Duchess. But people saw it as a cry for help. Commenters flooded social media with speculation. Was it a plea to her daughters? A coded message to Andrew? Or a subtle protest against the palace machine that had frozen them out? The palace declined to comment, but royal correspondents noticed something else. That very same morning, Ferguson's communications team was dissolved. Her senior press advisor had resigned, citing differences in crisis strategy. The York operation, once defiant, was collapsing from the inside. For Beatrice and Eugenie, this was the confirmation they'd been dreading. They could see it unfolding in real time, said one friend close to the sisters. Every post, every leak, it was all undoing the progress they'd tried to protect. That afternoon, Andrew made another attempt to reach his daughters, insisting they return to Windsor to show unity. Both declined. "They're scared," the friend continued. "Not of him, but of what happens if they're photographed standing beside him again." Embert. By now, their absence had become its own kind of presence. Tabloids published side-by-side images, a smiling Andrew from years past and an empty driveway at Royal Lodge. The contrast was brutal. The Duke alone, read one headline. Inside the palace, the optics were being closely monitored. Senior aides advised the king to keep distance from the York situation altogether. "It's a private family matter," one statement read, a phrase royal reporters recognized as code for "we don't want to be associated." But nothing inside the royal ecosystem stays private for long. Late on October 12th, an unverified rumor began circulating online that a letter from Clarence House had been delivered to Royal Lodge requesting a full review of residential entitlements. In simpler terms, it meant Andrew's future in the estate was under formal reconsideration. When asked about it, a palace insider refused to confirm or deny, only saying, "Everything is under review." The next morning, the mood at Royal Lodge was described as grim. Sarah Ferguson reportedly broke down in tears after a phone call with a senior royal advisor. "She feels cornered," one staff member confided. "She believes there's a campaign to erase the Yorks from royal life completely." But to many observers, that process had already begun. On social media, royal enthusiasts began comparing photographs from previous years. The York sisters laughing on the Buckingham balcony, the family attending church together at Sandringham. "Those moments feel ancient now," wrote one user. "You can't even imagine them standing together anymore." By October 13th, Even supporters of the York family began to acknowledge the rift. The Telegraph ran an editorial titled, "Silence as a Statement, the York Daughters' Moral Line." The article praised Beatrice and Eugenie for choosing dignity over defense, noting that, in an era of confessions and documentaries, their refusal to speak has become the purest form of rebellion. Still, the silence hurt. Friends close to Ferguson say she kept the television on all day, watching the coverage as though waiting for her daughters to appear. They didn't. "They used to call her every evening," said one confidant. "Now it's once a week. And when they talk, it's businesslike, short, careful, afraid to touch the wound." That same evening, a reporter outside Royal Lodge captured a fleeting image. Andrew, standing by an upstairs window, staring out across the lawn. The photo ran on the front page of the Daily Mirror the next morning, with a single headline, "The House of York in Shadow." It wasn't just a metaphor. It was fact. The once lively home where Beatrice and Eugenie grew up had fallen silent. The family dinners, the laughter, the public charm, all replaced by isolation, suspicion, and strategy. And yet, through that silence, the sisters' decision seemed firmer than ever. They weren't turning away in cruelty, but in survival. "They're done playing the supporting roles," said one commentator. For the first time, they're writing their own script. As the evening of October 13th settled over Windsor, the Royal Lodge glowed faintly under a half moon. The estate looked peaceful from the outside, but inside, the family it once sheltered was splintering into silence. Sarah Ferguson, still clinging to the idea of reconciliation, whispered to a friend that night, "They'll come home when this passes." But as one palace aide put it quietly, watching the headlines scroll by, "It's not passing, it's changing. The Yorks aren't waiting for peace, they're learning to live without it." And by the time morning came, it was clear to everyone in Windsor, this wasn't just a rift. It was the beginning of a permanent separation, written not in scandal, but in silence. By October 14th, the silence turned against them. What began as quiet withdrawal was now being rewritten by the press as abandonment. The tabloids, hungry for a new royal villain, had found their target, not Andrew, not Fergie, but the daughters who refused to stand beside them. "Beatrice and Eugenie, the Vanishing Act," blared the Daily Mail. "Even loyalty has limits," claimed the Mirror. Across breakfast tables and talk shows, the question echoed. Had the daughters of York finally walked away for good? That same day, the Times revealed that Royal Lodge, the sprawling Windsor residence still occupied by Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, was under review for financial transparency. A discreet line in the Treasury report confirmed ongoing discussions regarding private maintenance responsibilities. The translation was simple. The Crown wanted Andrew out. Inside the house, that revelation hit like thunder. Staff whispered that Ferguson burst into tears after receiving a call from her lawyers. "She knows what this means," one said. Losing the lodge isn't just losing a home, it's losing her last link to the royal world. Outside the gates, the cameras returned. Vans lined the road again, reporters waiting for any sign of movement. But there was none. The lodge remained shuttered, its grand windows cloaked in darkness. The only sound came from the headlines. By October 15th, the story evolved from property to morality. Pundits on late-night panels debated the sisters' silence as if it were a public duty. "Where's their compassion?" asked one host on GB News. "Their father is being humiliated in real time, and they're nowhere." Others defended them. "They owe the public nothing," argued commentator Lydia Harrington. "They were born into scandal, not by choice. Silence isn't betrayal, it's survival." Still, the criticism stung. Beatrice, back in London, reportedly canceled 2 meetings and turned off her phone for the weekend. "She doesn't cry," said a colleague, "but you can see it on her face. She's terrified of becoming the story again." In Lisbon, Eugenie faced her own headlines. Portuguese papers picked up the British coverage, describing her as the absent daughter of the Duke. Her friends tried to shield her, but she read every article. "She feels like she's being punished for staying quiet," one confidant admitted. And maybe she is. That night, another blow landed. Photos of Ferguson leaving Royal Lodge, eyes red, clutching her phone, circulated online. The accompanying headline read, "Alone at Windsor." Within hours, sympathy shifted toward the mother left behind. Public opinion had turned. The York sisters' silence, once admired, now looked cold. By October 16th, the crescendo peaked. The Telegraph reported that Beatrice had been invited to appear in Vogue UK's Women of Influence feature, but declined. "She doesn't want to talk about family," said an editor. "She doesn't want to talk at all." If free, that same day, a new image emerged. Eugenie, photographed at a Lisbon cafe, signing a charity document using the name Eugenie Brooksbank. No royal title, no York. Just a name, plain and human. It was a detail small enough to miss, but powerful enough to set social media ablaze. Has Eugenie dropped her title? Are the Yorks disowning the crown? No answer came. No statement followed. And so, by the night of October 16th, the public's fascination turned to fatigue. The Yorks were once again what they had always been, an enigma the palace wouldn't touch, and the press couldn't stop chasing. Inside Royal Lodge, the lights went out before midnight. In London and Lisbon, two sisters, one walking through fogged London streets, the other beneath the Atlantic moon, checked their phones in silence, scrolled through the noise, and chose not to reply. Because sometimes, in the royal world, silence isn't protection anymore. It's surrender. By October 17th, the silence fractured into two directions. The York sisters, once inseparable, always united, were now walking different roads. One toward the palace, the other away from it. In London, Princess Beatrice made a quiet visit to Kensington Palace. The meeting was never listed, never photographed, but word spread fast. She met Catherine privately, an insider confirmed. It wasn't about scandal, it was about survival. Catherine, recovering from her own public battles, was said to have offered advice that sounded more like warning. Silence only protects you if you control it. For Beatrice, the message was clear. Align with stability. Reclaim purpose. Stay visible, but on the palace's terms. That same day, Eugenie appeared in Lisbon for the Global Green Future Forum. Her speech was brief, composed, and utterly telling. Sometimes, she said, to move forward with integrity, you must step back from what no longer defines you. The audience applauded politely. But within hours, the line had gone viral in the UK. Was this her goodbye to royal life? Or a declaration of independence cloaked in diplomacy? Inside Windsor, the division became impossible to ignore. Beatrice is playing the long game, said one royal correspondent. She wants to rebuild quietly, to be seen as reliable. Eugenie, she's done. She's chosen freedom. By October 18th, the palace machine began adjusting itself accordingly. Beatrice's name resurfaced on an upcoming royal charity event roster. Eugenie's did not. Meanwhile, the Duchess of York, left alone at Royal Lodge, was reportedly packing boxes. It's not eviction, clarified a palace aide. It's transition. But everyone knew what it meant. The Royal Lodge, once filled with laughter and parties, was now a mausoleum of quiet endings. Late that night, the sisters spoke by phone for the first time in weeks. The call lasted 6 minutes. They didn't argue, said a family friend. They just talked like two people standing on different sides of the same river, both knowing the bridge had burned. By October 20th, the shift was complete. Beatrice, still in London, was photographed leaving her office, smiling faintly, head high. Eugenie, back in Lisbon, was seen pushing a stroller by the waterfront, unbothered, at peace. Two daughters, two destinies. The tabloids called it the divide of the Yorks. But to those who understood the unspoken code of royal survival, it wasn't division, it was evolution. Because silence had done its work. It had stripped away privilege, protection, and pretense, leaving only what was real. Two women determined to live life on their own terms. And as October's chill settled over Windsor, the story of the Yorks closed not with scandal, but with surrender. The palace would move on. The headlines would fade. But the sisters' silence, strategic, painful, powerful, would remain. The House of York had fallen quiet. And maybe, in that quiet, the daughters had finally found their freedom. If you followed this far, thank you for joining us through this unfolding royal reckoning. What happens next? For Beatrice? For Eugenie? For the legacy of York remains unwritten. But one thing is certain. In the monarchy's long, echoing corridors, silence always has a voice. Stay with us for the next chapter. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because in royal history, the story never truly ends.